July 3, 1867. 4 miles west of Plum Creek, Nebraska Territory. You feel the heat first, a dry, metallic heat that rides off the prairie and climbs like steam off the newly driven spikes. The men are low to the ground, the flat of their backs smeared with ballast dust and oil. Between their knees, the iron lies bright and unforgiving. A section crew of the Union Pacific, 12 men in patched shirts, straw hats, and heavy buckskin gloves, moves with practiced choreography. 2 section foremen call orders in short, clipped tones. The handcar idles on the temporary siding. A lantern swings at its rail, orange and small. Tamping bars ring like hammers on anvils. Spikes are driven, plates sit tight, and the temporary joints are closed with the sweating, awkward ritual of men who measure the world by inches and rail gauge. Among the crew is William Thompson, a wiry trackman whose name will later circulate in hushed retellings of what happens here tonight. Thompson's fingers are split from rope and steel. His face is a map of dried sweat. He and the others chatter about pay, the last week's whiskey, the report from the foreman that more track will be laid by dusk. Beyond them, the railroad is not only a corridor of iron and wood, but also a rolling theater of claims and trespass. Stakes and telegraph poles marking a line that slices across hunting grounds and buffalo trails. On the ridge beyond the work camp, the land looks the same as it always has. Waves of waist-high grass, a gullied coulee, the glitter of a distant creek. But the air holds something else, an animal-type pause, like the moment before a hailstorm. Shadows move in the grass, not with the lurch of men, but with a lithe, patient patience. In the evening light, a band of Lakota warriors watches the men lay the last stretch of rail. They are not cloaked in mystery. Their horse tack creaks faintly. Their moccasins leave no more trace than a breeze. Their leader, lean and deliberate, studies the line with the same care the foremen show the joint. He has seen trains through a spyglass of sorrow, thundering iron that thinned the herd and foretold a future where buffalo were ghosts. He has seen soldiers and sawmills and treaty pages that promised one set of rights and delivered another. Tonight, the decisions are quiet and tactical. As the sun leans low, rails meet and plates bite. The handcar's crew lugs the last fish plate into place. Men stamp the ballast with their boots, shout for the next length of rail, and smash spikes home until steel sing against wood. In this particular moment, there is a shared human certainty that a single night of sleep will deliver a longer, firmer road west, that tomorrow the iron will carry freight and mail and the steady progress of manifest destiny. But certainty has a weight that can be pried apart. Night comes early. Lanterns are banked, fires are wrapped down to embers, and the men sleep clustered near the handcar. 2 of them on the flat, 3 in blankets knotted around their shoulders. Horses stand tethered, their breath blind in the cooling air. The prairie smells of sage. A far-off coyote wails. Under a sky so dense with stars it seems to press on the world, the Lakota make their move. They do not rush. They work the way a river works a stone, deliberate, patient, efficient. Men with short pry bars and wooden levers move beneath the moon. They lift spikes, lever out plates, and pull at the ties as if unraveling a rope. Where the track is newly laid and joints still raw, the rails breathe their small, pliable secret. Metal can be coaxed, lifted, folded, especially when men orchestrate each motion with practiced hands and horses to haul. By dawn, entire sections of rail vanish into the long grass. Other stretches are left not missing, but transformed. rails bent and looped back on themselves, tied with telegraph wire and piled with timber and brush, so that the night looks like a magician's trick and not the work of a modern army. When the first light pries open the horizon, the foremen wake to a scene that feels like an accusation. The handcar's track is a jagged line of absence. Where a rail should run, there is nothing but a hollowed bed and a trail of scuffed earth. In places, the iron is present, but contorted, two rails twisted together as if someone had knotted them with brutal care. A pile of ties and telegraph wire lies neatly bundled, a dark, absurd wreath at the side of the roadbed. Thompson is awake, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and the first thing he says is a sound that starts small and then becomes a shout. They took it! They took the rail! This was not a random act of vandalism. It is guerrilla sabotage executed with an index of knowledge. The tactics mirror knowledge of the railroad's anatomy. Remove the plates that keep gauge, lift the spikes that lock the rail to the tie, and the iron will buckle on its own. Sometimes rails were skidded away into ravines. Sometimes they were twisted and tied so that they could not be used. The effect is the same. The network stutters. Locomotives find no iron where iron should be. Freight and mail are delayed, and a project that counts on a steady march is forced to stop and reassess. For the men on the crew, anger and fear wash across the face like wind. For the Lakota, the action is a statement, a way to slow the machine slicing through homeland. By the time soldiers are summoned and telegrams sent down the line, there are already stories starting to form. That whole lengths of track had disappeared overnight, that rails were piled and twisted, that men would wake to a landscape rearranged. These are the reports that will travel through the railroad's dispatch system, into the offices of company superintendents, and into the crowded rooms of Eastern newspapers. They will be used as evidence and warning. But for the men kneeling here at dawn, the immediate tasks are base and furious. To find the missing iron, to gather the detritus, and to make fast the line once again. The prairie holds its breath. The war for the rails has quietly begun.
Dawn bled fully across the plains before any semblance of order returned to the work camp. The Union Pacific foremen shouted over one another, inspecting torn ballast and splintered ties like surgeons probing a wound. William Thompson knelt beside the nearest bent rail, two lengths of iron curled back onto themselves like wet rope, and touched it as if it might answer him. It wasn't rage in his expression, it was disbelief. By mid-morning, the telegraph key in the makeshift signal tent was clacking without pause, brass lever punching out frantic reports to North Platte, to Omaha, to the district chief of engineers. Track lifted, rail removed, sabotage suspected, request military protection. The reply came within the hour. Detachments of the 7th U.S. Cavalry, Custer's regiment, though he himself was elsewhere, were already stationed along portions of the line. Now, under the authority of the Department of the Platte, they were to advance and enforce security of rail construction by any means necessary. Cavalry officers rode out with sabers clinking at their thighs and carbines slung across their backs, their blue coats stiff in the heat. Lieutenant Jonathan Caldwell, a rigid man whose mustache curled like punctuation, surveyed the desecrated track with practiced disdain. "Savages don't do this by accident," he said flatly, running a gloved hand along the contorted metal. "This is planned." The order he issued to his troopers was even simpler: ride the line, shoot on sight. Yet for all the bravado, there was unease in every saddle. The Great Plains were too wide, too quiet. Out here, visibility was both a blessing and a warning. A man could see for miles, until he realized he was being watched from further still. Cavalry patrols clattered along the unfinished grade, sabers flashing, horses snorting. They found no warriors, no hoofprints that held shape, no campfire ash. only distant silhouettes on the ridges, appearing and vanishing like mirages. Meanwhile, beside the track, replacement rails were dragged into place, but this time, construction followed a new rhythm, every swing of the sledge accompanied by a nervous glance over the shoulder. Riflemen stood with Henry repeaters cradled in their arms, while the laborers worked. Some of the track layers wore pistols at their belts, their hammers held like weapons instead of tools. Thompson muttered to his partner between spikes. "He ain't fightin' like soldiers," he said. "They're fightin' like the land itself hates us." That night, the cavalry camped beside the workers, lanterns burning all night, a full perimeter of sentries posted at 50-yard intervals. Orders were barked, rifles cleaned, sabers laid beside bedrolls. No singing, no laughter, just tension, heavy and metallic, settling over the camp like dew. Somewhere beyond the glow of their fires, the Lakota watched again. Only this time, they did not creep close with levers and rawhide cords. They waited, they studied, and they marked every rifle, every horse line, every gap in the sentry pattern, because they were not done with the iron road. Not by a long shot.
The cavalry expected a raid. They expected painted riders thundering down from the ridgeline, rifles cracking, arrows wheeling through torchlight. But what came instead was nothing at all. No attack, no footprints in the morning, no sign of trespass. For 3 days. And in that absence, tension became poison. Sentries snapped at one another. Trackmen drank deeper from bottles they swore they didn't have. Horses paced restlessly on their ropes. Even Lieutenant Caldwell began to doubt his own certainty. On the 4th night, he doubled the guard rotation, ordering fresh torches planted every 20 yards along the grade. "We'll blind them with our own light," he declared. But light can reveal as much as it obscures. Near midnight, when the moon sat high and pale, a sound rose over the prairie. Not the war whoop of charging riders, but a low metallic groaning, like a ship's hull shifting at sea. Then, crack. A rail fell inward. Men leapt from their bedrolls, boots half-laced, rifles drawn. Torches hissed in the wind as they swept them toward the sound. There, 50 yards down the line, the rail was moving. Not removed, not twisted, bending, as if some giant hand beneath the earth were pushing it upward. Lieutenant Caldwell charged forward, saber drawn, shouting for his troopers to form a line. But when they reached the site, there was no assailant, no tool left behind, no scent of horses. Just iron, warped by force. "How in God's name?" Thompson whispered, crouched beside it. Then he found it. A length of iron spike, jammed deep into the gravel bed beneath the tie, wedged sideways, used like a lever. They had not unbolted the rail, they had pinned it from below, loading pressure against the joint until even steel surrendered. A single warrior could have done it, in silence, in minutes. The truth landed hard. They were not guarding against men. They were guarding against methods, and those could come from anywhere. Caldwell flung his torch to the ground and swore. "We pull the guard back. We fortify the worksite. No more night watch along the stretch. We hold one position and defend it." But defense assumes the enemy wants to fight you. The Lakota did not. They wanted the iron itself, and they were learning new tricks. At dawn, the far telegraph pole lay on its side, not chopped, not burned, but sawed clean at the base and replanted upside down. Its wires knotted like a joke. A message. You can build faster. We can undo faster still. August 14, 1867, noon.
The rail line near Plum Creek had limped back into operation under constant guard, but every mile forward felt like inching across thin ice. Patrols rode ahead of the work crews now, inspecting every tie and joint before allowing a locomotive to advance. Telegraphs crackled with warnings up and down the division. Expect interference. And yet, under pressure from headquarters, the superintendent ordered freight service to resume. Train number 4, a wood-fired locomotive hauling mail, tools, and rations, crept along the newly reinforced stretch with agonizing caution. Her engineer, Samuel Price, rode with one hand on the brake lever and the other hovering over the whistle. Every gust of wind became a phantom, every creek crossing a prayer. Along the flatbed carriage behind him sat 4 cavalrymen, assigned as escort, rifles rested across their knees. They had been assured that the track ahead was secured, but reassurance was a currency that had lost value in these parts. A quarter-mile ahead, the rail curved gently through a shallow gully. Price leaned forward, squinting through the plume of steam. Then he froze. The rail was gone. Not twisted, not broken. Missing. Vanished as though dragged into the earth. "Brake!" someone screamed. He didn't know if it was him or the fireman, and the engine lurched as the wheels screeched against steel. Too late. The locomotive's front axle hit open gravel and dove nose first into the ditch. The boiler shrieked like a dying animal. Freight cars buckled behind, snapping coupling pins like brittle bones. One car jackknifed, flipped, and crumpled into splinters. Mail sacks burst into the wind. A crate of rifle ammunition burst open and clattered down the bank like hail. Price was thrown clear and landed half buried in ballast, ears ringing. One of the cavalry escorts hung upside down over the steam dome, leg broken and slick with blood. Another crawled through soot, coughing, rifle still clutched in hand like instinct rather than thought. Then came the worst sound of all. Silence. No gunfire, no war cry, no triumphant whoop from the ridges. Just the broken wheeze of cooling metal. They were not attacked. They were simply allowed to suffer. Minutes passed before someone found the joint where the rail had been lifted. The spikes had been removed with surgical precision, plates loosened, and the entire 30-foot length hauled aside and concealed in tall grass no more than 20 yards away. Leaves placed over the scar in the ballast bed to hide it until the moment of disaster. Lieutenant Caldwell arrived with riders within the hour and stood over the wreckage, jaw clenched so tight his teeth creaked. "This isn't war," he muttered. "This is humiliation." But humiliation can be weaponized. By sundown, the newspapers had the story. "Indians derail train. Entire track stolen from under locomotive." Back in Omaha, telegraph clerks swore they saw sparks fly from the key. The order that returned from headquarters was short. No more halt, no more defense, move forward at all costs. But iron and willpower were no match for hands that could unbuild the world faster than it could be assembled, and the Lakota were not finished carving their message into the steel. The war for the rails had been waged in silence. Spikes lifted, iron bent, locomotives toppled. Ghost work in the night. But on August 22nd, 1867, silence ended. It was dusk when the work crew, now swollen with armed escorts, pushed past a shallow draw lined with cottonwoods. Cavalry scouts had ridden ahead an hour earlier and returned shaking their heads. No movement, no tracks, no smoke. So the foreman ordered the line extended. Men knelt, hammering plates. Others hoisted sleepers. Caldwell and his troopers dismounted and stood guard in a loose perimeter. No laughter, no songs, just the iron chorus of spikes biting wood. Then, whoosh! An arrow slammed into the gravel between two men.
Another struck a plate stack with a metallic clang. Then the ridges came alive. They didn't charge, they appeared. Dozens of Lakota warriors on horseback crested the rise in a single silent wave, painted faces gleaming in the last spill of sunlight. Feathers caught the wind, rifles rested across arms, bows bent, 100 yards away, not approaching, just watching. Both sides froze. No one fired. A breeze rattled the cottonwood leaves. Caldwell stepped forward, hand hovering near his pistol, but not drawing it. Across the draw, one of the warriors, tall, bare-chested beneath a buffalo hide mantle, guided his horse down the slope with effortless ease. He rode alone toward the line, stopping within clear view but out of rifle range. His expression held neither fury nor fear. He raised an iron spike, held it high, then tossed it into the dirt. A statement. This is not theft. This is refusal. Caldwell, stiff with pride and dust, called out, "You speak English?" The warrior did not answer. Instead, he pointed to the unfinished rail, then to the horizon, then back to the rail. The meaning was unmistakable. Turn it back. The men behind Caldwell shifted uneasily. Some track layers muttered prayers. Others gripped their hammers like clubs. Thompson stood still, breathing shallow, heart pounding in a rhythm older than iron. Caldwell clenched his jaw. "You can't stop this. This line will go through." The warrior tilted his head, then gave the slightest smile, not of humor, but recognition. "We already have." He wheeled his horse around sharply and rode back up the slope. The others followed in perfect stillness. Not a stampede, but a withdrawal without fear. Not retreat, dismissal. Only after the last rider vanished did Caldwell give the order. "Back to camp. Double watch. No one sleeps unarmed." But Thompson, still staring at the discarded spike, realized something far worse than danger. The Lakota were not fighting to win. They were fighting to deny the idea of winning altogether.
By September, the Union Pacific had thrown everything at the problem. More soldiers, more scouts, more rifles riding horseback beside every handcar pushing west. Supply trains doubled their escorts. Telegraph wire was checked hourly. Track was laid, ripped up, relayed, guarded, prayed over. And yet, the sabotage didn't stop. It evolved. Rails weren't just lifted, they were rearranged into symbols. Spirals laid across the ballast like snake trails. Knotted wire draped over telegraph poles like trophies. A single spike nailed into the center of the grade, standing upright like a warning stake. And sometimes, there was nothing. No attack, no missing metal, just the feeling that every tie laid was being watched, weighed, judged, measured against a promise no one had the right to make. In late autumn, as frost began to creep into the prairie grass, William Thompson found himself staring out across a completed section of track that disappeared into a horizon he no longer trusted. He had left the East believing he was helping stitch a nation together. Now every hammer strike felt like an intrusion, like building a sentence in a language the land refused to speak. "This line's going to reach the sea," one of his crewmates said beside him, wiping grease from his hands. Thompson didn't answer, because he knew something most men refused to say out loud. Steel could be laid, but steel could not conquer. The trains did eventually roll, thundering, shrieking, cutting through the plains like iron sermons. But they never ran without a whisper in the cab, a chill in the fireman's hands, a story passed between brakemen. Somewhere out there, there's a place where the Lakota lifted the rail clean out of the world. And every man who laid track west of Plum Creek spent the rest of his life wondering, what keeps it in place now? The answer was never iron. It was permission. And permission, once revoked, could be taken again.